Start recording here. Just I want to highlight, usually earlier, I will go to begin with database auditing models, okay? And from there, I will go to explain the concepts in security. But I notice usually when I begin with that, from theory point of view for audit topic, decisions a little bit are confused, when we discuss about some of the security concepts in, let's say, SQL. So therefore, now the approach is that I'll begin with a stored procedure, the one that we have done earlier, okay? And for today, I will go to explain the next topic, which is trigger. Because trigger will be used in many aspects from security point of view, So therefore, just I want to ask, is there any question about stored a procedure before I proceed with triggers? Okay, so let's begin this case for our topic for today, which is trigger. If I want to ask, what is a trigger? If anyone, have deal with this concept earlier in databases, what are triggers? What are triggers? Okay, seems nobody heard about this term. No worries. Now, before I go discuss about this term, we need to know, first of all, from where we get this concept. Okay? Now, first of all, let me just go to discuss about the topic and the structure of today's lesson. So, first, I will go discuss about something called integrity enhancement feature. Now, integrity enhancement feature basically is a topic which is not in database security, okay? It is basically in introduction to database or advanced database, let's say advanced database. But I want to visit this or to remind you with this topic once again to know how we reach to the trigger concept, trigger concept, okay? Then what are triggers? So we'll discuss here what is the definition of the trigger and so on. Then how to go to deal with something called insert, delete, and update a trigger and update a trigger. Now, first of all, we know that in SQL languages, we have 6 main constraints. What are they? When I'm dealing with SQL commands, we have 6 main constraints. What are they? Can anyone give me the answer in the chat box? When we are dealing with SQL language using DDL commands, right? Basically, when I use the create command, I can add 6 constraints. What are these 6 constraints in SQL? Anyone remember the 6 constraints in SQL? Okay, let's go for advanced database. Primary keys, right? The first one. Second one. Foreign keys, that's correct. So the first one is primary key, the second one is foreign key. What else? Unique, right? Unique is the third constraint. What else? Not null, right? This type is not really default, right? So basically we have primary key, foreign key, unique, not null, default, and the last one, the last famous one is what? This is when you learn SQL, always you will take it. You know, it is like basics. Database management systems, they may add others, but these are the basics. Okay, let me just show you here, just to remind you about what we are talking about. Okay, when we deal with that DDL commands, right? Usually we have something called integrity enhancement features or integrity constraints. They are not null, unique, primary key, foreign key, and a check constraint. For example, I can choose a check constraint. If I want to say salary, for example, must be, let's say, for example, less than from 0 to, let's say, 50,000. Okay, in this case, I will add what? I will add a check constraint. Then we have default. Now, if you check for this constraint, you will notice that these constraints have a limitation. This limitation is that they are only applied on one table only. They are only applied on what? One table only, and in major cases, they applied on what? On one column only. Okay, so if I want to go here to give this example for assumption, so I can create a table called employee, right? This is the DDL command, where I can say we have, for example, a primary key for the first column, right? Then we have not null. Then I can add what? A check constraint. So I can say, for example, salary must be greater than 0, and salary must be less or equal what? 10,000. Okay. Then also I can add foreign key and so on. Now, I want to go back to the design phase. When we discuss about business rules, we have two types of business rules. What are they? Right, at the beginning of the course, we have done what? Design or ERD design. We have done revision for ERD design. Usually, we have something called business rules. For business rules, we have two types. What are they? What are the two business types that we have? Structural and procedural. Thank you very much. Lee, thank you very much. Structural and procedural, right? Now you will notice in the ERD, in major cases, structural, it is easy for you to add it in the ERD. We done this discussion earlier, right? For example, if I said that the customer will order money items, in this case, this is structural because I have entities and also relationship, right? But if I said the following, if I said that if the customer bought more than, let's say the amount of the bill was, or the invoice was more than 100 ringgit, so I'll give him discount for 50%. This part is procedural, and in major cases, you can't add it to the ERD. You can't represent it. So we need a way to represent these things. As a result, the trigger concept emerged. So one of the major things that trigger will do is that it will go to apply the procedural business rules. Because we'll see right now that trigger is working in automated way. That means triggers are really very powerful tool that we can handle, that we can use to handle our databases. Okay, some part of it will be basically on constraints and so on, and doing some actions. At the same time, I can use it for what? For security purposes. As we'll go to see while we are moving with the slide. Okay, so I hope the concept is clear. So basically here, when we discuss about integrity enhancement features, we have required data, which means I use not null, right? Domain constraints, check, entity integrity, which is the primary key. Referential integrity, we are talking about the foreign key. Now, when we discuss about enterprise constraints, you hear this term, or when we have the concept which is procedural business rules, they are the same concept to some extent, okay? Basically, we are discussing about the rules that I can't embed it in my design, and later I need to apply it in my programming, right? Now, this is just an example here in the slide, how we add what the required, let's say, data. So I say here, not null, for example, for check constraint, I say check for gender, and so on, okay? Now, this is just a revision for the first slides, just for you. Just I'm adding it just to remind you about the concept, okay? I want to highlight, when we discuss about referential integrity, we have 4 actions, right? Cascade, not null, set default, and no action. What this means? When I say cascade in referential integrity, what that means? Can anyone remember what cascade means? when I am working with the foreign key, we have 4 referential integrity actions. Take actions. What do you mean? For example, let me make it more clear. Assume that we have 2 tables. Let's go for dream home. So I'll go here for tables. So I'll go for branch and the staff. Select all from here and select all from here. The different keys from different tables can be related. No, not really. Let me make it in more a clear example. Notice here, this is the primary key for the branch table, right? Okay. And here we have the foreign key, which is branch number in the staff table. Now, if I set the foreign key here, the action is cascade. What that means? If the action for the foreign key is cascade, what that means? To make it more clear, let me go for the database diagram. If I said the following, if I said that this here, let me just show you. Okay. Let's go for properties. Okay. Notice here, where is it? Okay, here. Notice here I said the delete rule is no action. If I say this one is cascade, what will happen? Anyone remember what will happen? If I update this as cascade, okay, that means if I delete a record from the branch table, all the related records in the staff table will be deleted. Will be deleted, right? And if I update, also I said, okay, for update rule, it is also cascade. If I update a primary key in the branch number, all the related records in the foreign key will be updated. Okay. Now, in general, the action will be no action. And this is why you'll notice, and sometimes when you delete a record from the staff table, for example, where I have the foreign key, okay, and you have the foreign key, that means it is connected to the branch, you will be able to delete that record. There is no issue. But in the branch table, if you try to delete that record, it will not be deleted. It will not be deleted. Why? Because it will say there are related records in the staff table. They are related records in the staff table. Okay. What we call this? We call this as referential actions. We have 4 actions. We have what? 4 actions on either delete or update. The first one, no action, that means do nothing. So if I want to delete a record from the branch table, it will not it will reject the deletion because if there is a related records in the staff table. Okay. Cascade means no. If I want to delete a record from the branch table, all the related records in the staff table will be deleted. So cascade is very dangerous. Usually we are working with it, with caution. Set null. In some cases, I may, let's say, want to delete a branch or cancel a branch. So all the students or all the staff in that branch, the value for the foreign key will be set to null. The last one will be what? Will be default. Default, I will go to define a default value for the branch number in my staff table. Then when in the branch table, I'll go to delete it. That value for the related, let's say, deleted records will be updated in the branch table. Okay. I assume that you know this information. So this is why I'm moving so fast. And it's outside of our topic. I want to highlight it. I want to highlight it. Later, you can create 2 simple tables and try this by yourself. Okay, clear? Any question till now before I proceed? Okay, so first, so Here also in the slide, just I added the concept so you can just relate it. And you can test it by yourself, basically. Now, enterprise constraints, just here I give more examples, can be applied using triggers. For example, in Dream Home, in our database, you may have a rule that prevents a member of staff from managing more than 100 properties at the same time. Okay, this type of constraint, it can be applied using the previous 6 constraints, right? So you need what? You need something new. This new thing is what is called a trigger. A Dream Home may have a rule that if a job position is manager, the salary must not exceed 30,000. Okay. Now later in the examples, I will go first to apply normal constraints, like maybe check constraint. Okay. Then later I will go to use trigger to simulate the same action. So that will lead us to the definition of the triggers. What are triggers? Triggers are powerful tools that enable you to enforce domain, entity, referential data integrity, and enterprise constraints or business rules. To make it more clear, procedural business rules. Okay, once again, triggers are powerful tools that enable you to enforce domain, entity, referential data integrity, and enterprise constraints or procedural business rules. A trigger is a special kind of stored procedures. So we'll see that the syntax basically for the trigger is similar to the stored procedure, but there are some differences which I'll go to highlight in this lecture. When we discuss about the type of triggers, we will have 3 types of triggers that all of them I will go to cover in this database security, okay, module. In that advanced database, usually only cover the first part, which is DML. So these triggers will be DML triggers, DDL triggers, and log on triggers. Okay. So how triggers works? How a trigger works? Triggers basically is a code that we have, okay, which will be called referring to a specific action. This action can be DML action or DDL action or something called log on to the server action. What I mean by that? Let's assume that I want to, each time I do execute an insert statement, I want to validate the data that I want to insert. In this case, I can create a trigger attached to that insert action. So anytime any user insert or execute insert statement, okay, directly the trigger will be activated, and inside the trigger I will add the code that will go to do what? To do validation for the the records, for example, which is inserted, and so on. So data manipulation language triggers can't be called directly. So you'll see later if I say execute, then the name of the trigger, I will not get anything. I will get an error. Okay. Instead, they are configured on individual tables or views and respond to the following DML commands, which is insert, update, or delete statements. Okay. So in general, for DML commands, they are basically response for insert command, update, delete. Select does not have any trigger. Why? Because select only I am retrieving data. I'm not modifying data. I'm not modifying data in first place. Okay. Then we have DDL triggers. DDL triggers are basically the triggers that we can execute if I go for create, alter, or drop commands. Log on triggers are basically the triggers that will be activated when I try to log on to the server, and this one is usually dangerous one, because if you have done or applied the log on trigger in wrong way, in major cases you will not be access to the server. Later I'll show you some examples for that, okay? So when we are dealing with logon triggers, we need to be aware on how we apply that. Otherwise, I may simply just look my server, because simply the logon trigger is code was wrong. So I'm always achieve the condition. That means always the trigger will be disconnecting me as a user try to log into the database. So when we reach logon trigger, I will give you examples for that. I'm going to give you some examples for that. Okay, now what is a trigger? Okay, let me just I think I already done it earlier. Okay, let's go here. Let me now explain how the trigger will look like when you work on your system. But before that, okay, let's go here for some examples just to make it more clear. When I say insert trigger here, so when an insert command is executed on a table, okay, an insert trigger on the table fires. So for example, when an order is placed, okay, inserting data into the order table, you might like to update the on-hand inventory column in the product tables. You know, in the any e-commerce website, we know that when I make an order for an item, I want to ensure also at the same time that item on maybe the item table or product table, it will have some specific amount of quantity. What I mean by that? Let's assume I'm selling computers. Let's assume I am selling computers, okay? Now, assume we have 100 computers. And I'm selling these computers online. Now, let's assume one of the customers bought 10 computers. Now, it is not recorded from me to go say, okay, when the order is done and let's say the person done the payment and so on, to go manually and update what? Let's say this 100 computer to deduct from it, let's say 10 computers. No. What we can do, we can create a trigger. And the trigger will do what? It will go check, okay, is that confirmed that the user done the action or he done the payment? If the answer is yes, go to that table and deduct what? 10 computers. So that means the number between from 100 computers to what? To 90. So I'm doing what? I am automating the process. I am automating the process to what? To ensure the database integrity, to ensure the database integrity. Okay, so this is the first example. Second example, when an update command is executed on a table, on update trigger on that table, okay, so the trigger will be fired. So for example, if the management might want to know if anyone ever modified data, such as salary column. Now, one of the security features that I can apply, let me just highlight it for now in theory, later I'll show it in examples, okay. Let's assume here in my staff table, okay, one of the columns which is very important for me from either security point of view or also from strategic, let's say, business analysis and so on, is knowing what are the salaries values. So I can create a trigger to track any modification happens on the salary. Okay, and I will cover this after we discuss about a concept called auditing. After discuss about concept called what? Auditing, okay? So for example, I want to know if any person done update, insert or delete for the salary data or column here. In this case, I can record all this information in something called audit table, So later I can check if something goes wrong, I can check who done the action at what time and so on. Okay? Or maybe even raising an error that, okay, there is a person who is trying to access or manipulate, let's say, salary data and so on. So we can do all of this using what? Triggers, basically. The third example is delete. So I can have a condition when a delete command is executed on a table, a delete trigger on the table first. So for example, the company that you work at might not want ever to delete a customer from the customer table. Instead, customer should be marked as inactive. In reality, I have an example for that. Later, I'll go to give it in the examples. So here what I'm saying is that assume that let's say there is a customer or a staff, for example, is not working anymore in the company. So one of the users try to delete what the customer information. He says, okay, now he's not working there, so let me just delete the record. What I can do using the triggers, if the business rule says don't delete any user, I can do the following. I can say, okay, don't delete. I will show you now how we do that. Then execute the commands inside the trigger. So I can say what, instead of deleting, just mark the status to be what, inactive. So in this case, the record will be there, but what the status of that stuff will be inactive. It will be inactive. Okay, these are what? These are examples for the triggers. Now, when we discuss about the triggers, we have two types. We have something called after trigger. We have something called what? Instead of trigger. And now let me go to the example here to explain the first one, which is what? The after trigger. To explain after trigger and how it works from theory. Then later I'll go for the examples. But before that, any question till now? Any question till now? Okay, let's assume that I want to create a trigger on a table called staff. Okay, on a table called staff, and this trigger is called X. Okay, now inside the trigger, I want to check for each time an insert command is executed. Okay, I want to check that the salary must be less than what? 40,000. Okay, once again, our scenario will be the following. I want to create a trigger. This trigger is attached to the staff table. Each time an insert command is executed, directly the trigger will be called to check what? The inserted data. Okay? You notice one of the differences between triggers and stored procedures is that a trigger will be assigned to a specific table. A stored procedure, they are generic. Therefore, we will see later when we discuss about stored procedures, we said they are existing what? On database level under a programmability, right? While later, or now, not later, now when we go for triggers, you will see that trigger is under the table level. Trigger will be what? Under the table level, at least for the DML commands. If I'm dealing with DDL triggers, it will be on database. If I'm dealing with logon triggers, it will be on the server level. Okay, so that depends on the type of the trigger. DML commands, they are on the table level. So you'll see later in the syntax, I will say the name, create trigger, the name of the trigger, then on the table name, or the view name. So how this works, and here I need your full attention. Okay, because usually students are confused a little bit in this side, in this part, sorry. Notice here, we said the first name for the first trigger is what? It is after trigger. After trigger. What that means? Attention please now. First of all, assume that we have the SQL sheet, so I execute this command. So I said insert into staff, values, 1, Sam, 50,000. Okay. What will happen next? The data will be inserted in my table. Attention please now. When I use after trigger, the command here, the data, the action will happen. So if I said insert, the data will be inserted. If I said delete, data will be deleted. If I said update, data will be updated. So I said insert into staff. data will be inserted. Then database engine will check and see, is there any trigger attached to the insert command? We said here, yes, we have the X trigger. It is of type after and will be activated after the insert command. So what will happen here? The trigger will be activated. Inside the trigger, one of the conditions says salary must be less than 40,000. Now, is the value that I have inserted is less than 40,000? The answer is no. It is more than that, right? So what will happen in this case? I will go to do something called rollback. That means the record here, attention please now, the record will be inserted to my table. And then referring to the condition, I will do rollback. That means officially I am doing two actions, insert and delete, because rollback will do what? Will remove the effect of that transaction, which is insert into stuff. Clear? Any question till now? Any question till now? Are you with me? Today the class is so quiet. Yes, sir?
I don't understand what do you mean by rollback?
Okay. Now, in database, we have a concept called a transaction. We have a concept called what? A transaction. Any query that I do is basically transaction. Now, in database, we have two types. We have implicit transactions, which is like the daily queries that you are doing. And we have something called, what? Explicit transactions. For example, I can create a transaction, okay, while I can add more than one code to be executed as one execution plan. As one execution plan, okay? Now, a transaction by default supposed to end in two case scenarios at the end of it. If it is done successfully, I must say commit. Commit means the transaction ended successfully. If something goes wrong in the code that I have, I can do what? Rollback. I can do what? Rollback. Rollback means move the effect of the last transaction from my database. It is like delete, okay? But here I'm not deleting, I'm saying rollback. It is like I'm using the transaction concept, okay? Maybe if I want to give an example, just a simple example to make it more clear. I have it here, a transaction, or I don't have it. Let me check. Okay, transaction. Because I know transaction basically like undo. That's correct. Thank you very much. Tingui. That's correct. Now, notice here, any action you do is going to be as a transaction, okay? Any statement like insert, select, update, delete, and so on. Okay? Now, I can begin here. Let me just go to an example. Okay, for example, notice here, in this example here, excuse me, I want to create a transaction in explicit way. So notice here I say begin, you can later check this by yourself, okay? Begin a transaction, then I notice here execute more than one statement. Now transaction concept says, if I have explicit transaction, all the actions here must be done correctly. If any problem happens, simply I will do rollback for all the actions. To make it more clear, imagine that you are installing a program, right? At the end, when you reach 99, something goes wrong. So what the program will do, it will go to remove all the previous effect. It will do in database something called what? Rollback. So usually when I give this example here, I will go to insert some data into the stuff, then show the data that is inserted, then I'll go to update the record, then I'll go, let me execute this one. because just to make it more clear. Now notice here, let me just say, okay, set this transaction, execute. Okay. Now notice here, in a transaction, first I want to insert a record. So I want to show you the record is there, okay? Then I want to update that record that I have inserted. Then I will show you that the data was updated. Then notice here when I go for the third statement, I do intentionally, I duplicate what the primary key. So I make another insert statement with the same primary key. In this case, what will happen? It will not reach commit the transaction. Why? Because simply I have an error. So what will happen? It will do something called rollback. Let me show you what I mean by that. So let me just confirm this. It is on. And also let me check just to ensure that SL43 is not there. SL43, just to ensure that everything is correct. So beginning transaction, comment. This is 1 unit. So let me execute. Now notice here what happens. It says 1 row have been affected, right? 7 rows affected and so on. Notice here, then later we have violation of the primary key. Now when I go for the results, you'll notice here, when I execute the first statement, insert into, the record was inserted, right? When I execute the second statement, which is update, clerk, this position to be clerk, which is here, for SL43, it was updated, right? So this data was inserted in what? In my table, in first place. But when I try to insert this record, because I'm violating the primary key, what happens here? It gives me this error. It says violation of the primary key and so on, right? Now, notice here what will happen. If I select all from staff, I will not see this record. That means this record will not be there in my table, even though I know here it was inserted. Why? Because when the problem happens in the transaction, I will do rollback. I will do rollback. But let's hope that the condition was correct in first place. So select all from staff just to see. Notice here, I don't have SL43. Why? Because one of the concepts or properties of transactions is something called automaticity. So either I do all the statements or none will be done. Okay. Now here, the rollback is done in implicit way. I didn't mention it clearly, okay, because simply because I have an error, I know it will do that, the management system. But in other examples, no, it clearly says that. So notice here, I can begin a transaction, insert some data. If there is some error, I will use a try catch. Then I can say rollback if something goes wrong. Even I can give an error message and so on and so on. Okay, I hope the concept is clear to some extent, because usually in advanced database we'll go to explain this in details, but at least for now, I want from you to get the concept of a transaction. So when I say rollback, basically, okay, when I say rollback means what? Means cancel this action or cancel this transaction, which is what? Insert into stuff. So therefore, as I will show you later, the record will be removed from my table. The record will be removed from my table. Clear? Any question till now? Most welcome, most welcome. So once again, in the after trigger, the DML command will be executed. The data will be inserted in my table. The trigger will be activated because I'm having a trigger called X is attached to what? To the insert command, right? On the staff table. I'll show you the syntax later. Then I will go to check the condition. Is the data inserted meet this condition? If yes, nothing will happen. If no, I will do what? Rollback. That means I will remove the effect of this insert statement. Okay, and therefore after trigger is costly because I will do insert, then what? Delete. If you want to do that, right? If you want to go for the concept, I will do insertion, then what? Deletion at the same time. At the same time. Not the same time, I mean when I'm doing the action. Clear? Any questions till now? Okay. So DML triggers can be programmed to be performed either after the data modification or instead of data modification. Okay. When a trigger is created, one of these choices is specified. Now, the after trigger means an after trigger fires after data modification. In other words, the data modification occurs and then the trigger fires in response to the data modifications. Therefore, an after trigger that rolls back a data modification becomes an expensive operation because the data is changed twice when it shouldn't be changed at all. This is what? This is after a trigger. Okay. The second one, the second trigger is called instead of a trigger. Instead of a trigger. Now, what is instead of trigger? In simple way, instead of trigger says, if I want to do an action like insert, and I have instead of trigger, the trigger will say, don't do that action. Once again, if I have an instead of trigger on my table, on my staff table, and I want to delete a record, okay, that means that instead of is on activate on delete. In this case, instead of trigger will say the following. Instead of delete, that means instead of doing this statement, do the following. That means I will ignore the action will not be done. But what I will go to do, I will go to write a code to be executed inside my trigger here, inside my trigger. So it is like I'm preventing what? The action from execution, and then I do something else as a developer. I will give something or I will do something else. Okay? We call this what? We call this instead of trigger. So for example, if let's assume I said delete from staff, the record will not be deleted. The trigger will be activated, the database management system will check, oh, there is a delete. Okay, I said sorry, of trigger about delete, so the record will not be deleted. What will happen? Instead of that, I may print the following message. I will say, you can delete the stuff, record, for example. Or maybe I can add what other extra information, as I'll show you later in my trigger. I'll show you later in my trigger. Clear? Any question till now? So instead of a trigger, basically, instead of trigger, fires before data modification. In other words, the data modification is prevented from occurring, and instead the trigger is executed. Instead of triggers are commonly created on updatable views, or also it can be created on tables in general. And just I want to highlight here that instead of trigger, just for now, instead of trigger can be only created as one a trigger per table per action. What I mean by that, if I have the staff table here, I can only create one instead of delete on the staff table. And I create only one instead of insert and one instead of update. Clear? So if I have a trigger which says instead of delete, insert, update as actions, I can't create any other instead of trigger on that table. It will be only one trigger. While the after trigger, I can create more than one trigger. But usually we need to be aware when we are doing that. Because sometimes I will have a clash between what? Between the codes in these triggers, between these triggers. Okay, clear? Any question till now?
Also,
Yes. Any question? So far, so good? Okay. For now, I will give you a break for like 50 minutes, okay? And later I'll go discuss a concept called inserted and deleted tables, which is only exists in the triggers. It does not exist in the stored procedures. So yes, I'll give you a break now for 50 minutes. Then later we'll proceed with what? With the inserted and deleted tables. Okay, attention please. So, okay, let's get this question. So just to make sure, did you say that for the instead of trigger, we can only have one per table? And for the after trigger, we can have multiple per table. That's right. Basically, for instead of, we will have one per table per action. And now I will give you an example, or I'll show you this when I go for the practical part. When I go for the practical part. But the answer is yes. The answer is yes. Now, one of the unique thing in a trigger is that we have two, you can say, temporary tables, okay? And these two tables called inserted and deleted tables, okay? So triggers use two special tables that are only accessible to the triggers. That means it can't be accessible to any other, object like trigger. Like for example, sub procedure. The data in these tables is available immediately after an insert, update, or delete statement is executed. Okay. Inserted table. The inserted table holds data from the last insert or update statement, while the deleted table holds data from the last delete or update statement. So to make this more clear, let's go here to our diagram. Now, this will be applied for after trigger and instead of trigger, but I didn't show the two tables because just to make things simple. Now, when the trigger is, let's assume here, for example, I want to say delete from staff, okay? The trigger will be activated, right? Now, the record that I try to delete, okay, will be inserted in a table called deleted. The structure of deleted and inserted tables, okay, they are the same structure of the table that I want to delete the data from. That means, in this case, deleted table, the structure will be as what? As the sub table. That means I will have SNO, SNAME, and salary. The same thing goes for what? For inserted. So I will have SNO, SNAME, and salary. Now, when the delete action happens here, or supposed to happen, in this case, the record will be inserted in the deleted table. That means either have after a trigger or deleted trigger, a copy from that record will be either in deleted table or inserted table. Now, why I need to do that? I will go to discuss about this in the practical part. The lifespan of these two tables in the memory, which is deleted and inserted, will be from the beginning of the trigger to the end of the trigger. That means when I begin or call the trigger, these two tables will be created in the memory. When I reach the end of the trigger, that means the end of the code, these two triggers or these two tables will be deleted. These two tables will be deleted. That means you can't access them, as I will show you in the examples later. Okay. So notice here, if I then insert statement or execute insert statement, the information will be inserted to the table. Then a record in the inserted, okay, you can say temporary table will be there. Then for delete table, deleted records will be in the deleted table. If I then update on the other side, when I do the update table, update new records in the inserted, and deleted records will be in deleted. It will be in deleted. Okay, clear? Any question till now? Any question till now?
Sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So when to use triggers? What are the general cases? The first one, when I make changes to other columns in the same table or other tables within the database in response to data modification. One of the powerful features for triggers is that I can control, okay, the things outside my table. That is, for example, if I'm working on a staff table, The action on the staff table can also affect what the other table, so I can use trigger to do that. Let me give you an example. Imagine that in the case scenario, we have in advanced database, usually we give them a case scenario to develop, let's say, an okay. So we usually case scenario, one of the case scenarios will be that they have to build what a database to handle flight reservations, So in case that the customer cancel the flight, that means by default I need to modify a lot of values. For example, I need to cancel meals, or I need to cancel the special meals. Also, I need to cancel the booking for the specific seat on the airplane, and so on. So by using the trigger in one click, in one delete command or one update command, I can do what? I can do all of these actions while I'm using what? The triggers. Okay. Perform auditing by recording who made a data modification and when. And basically, this is the part that I will focus on later because we are concerning on the security aspect of the trigger in first place. Rollback or undo data modification, and then provide specialized error messages. As you'll say there, till now we were using the print function, but there is one special function called raise error, and can have many parameters that can help us, to customize the error message. So some facts of triggers. Check constraints can reference only one column in which the column level or table level constraints is defined. Any cross-table constraints business rules must be defined as triggers. Okay, we already mentioned this earlier. The triggers can use to enforce complex business logics that is difficult or impossible to be enforced by using other data integrity mechanisms. Here we are discussing about what? The primary key, foreign key, not null, and so on. Triggers can cascade changes through related tables in database. Okay. Triggers can evaluate the state of the table before and after data modification and take actions based on that difference. Clear till now? Any question before I go to begin with the trigger execution? Okay, so far so good. So let's go here to SQL Server. And let me just close everything. Where is it? Close all. No. Did I access this earlier? Let me just check. So the procedures, triggers. No, this is DL. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, let's go here, dream home, and then go for the triggers. Okay. Now, what I want to do before I go for give the first code about triggers, I want to show you how I can apply a domain constraint, okay, using check constraint, and then how I can use the triggers to apply the same constraint. Earlier when we discussed about trigger, we said that a trigger can simulate the work of the other constraints that we have. Okay, so to do that, let me just go here and first of all select all from staff. Okay, so let's assume here these are the salaries that we have. The maximum is what? 30,000. The maximum is what? 30,000. So I want to say the following. I want to say that if I want to insert any record, make sure the value must not exceed 40,000, for example. So to do that using the constraint, okay, using the alter command and as the DL command, so I will say alter table staff add constraint check salary is less or equal 40,000. So when I highlight this one here, then I will say execute. Notice your command completed successfully. And when I go for my staff here, my staff table, there is something called constraint, as you can see here. When I open it, I can find the constraint, and I can open it to check what? To check my code. So notice here, this is the graphical interface if I want to see it. So I notice here the expression says salary is less or equal 40,000. Okay, you can add using this graphical interface other expressions if you want, or other constraints. So as you wish. So for example, I can say add, then I can add another expression. Okay, so as you wish, as you wish. But for now, just I will deal with this one. Okay. The other way, I can go right click here and can go for modify. Okay, the same thing, I can modify it from here. So the same thing. Now, what is important for me is that, okay, we have the constraint. Okay. Now let me check that constraint. So I'll go here for my stuff, edit. Then let me update one of the salaries to be more than 40,000. So let's go here for this one, for example, and let's assume it is 50,000. So let's try to save the information. Notice here it says an update statement cause a problem because it is conflict with check cell, which is the constraint that I have created. Okay, so this is like normal constraint that we have. So what we do here, just I will do double escape on my keyboard just to remove any uncommitted, let's say transaction, uncommitted transaction. That means basically, let me just show you here. When I go to add, let's say, for example, let's say 60,000, and I have this the explanation, let's say mark. Usually to remove this easily, rather than go and delete it, just on escape and press twice, it will go to the previous value. It will go to the previous value. And also, let me just highlight one point here. You will notice here when you insert records in databases, right? Then later, just you'll go for tab to go for the next line, right? I don't go to say save. Why we are doing that in database? Because the moment that you move to the next line, that means that line is committed. That means the information already inserted to my database, Therefore, in database, we don't go to say, okay, for each insert record, go and save. No, the moment that you insert the record, move to the next line without any problem, the data will be saved in the database. Okay, in general. So now let's go here for our example for the Dream Home database. Now, what I want to do here, I want to delete the constraint that I have. So I use the alter command. So I said alter table staff, drop constraint, check cell. Okay, execute. And notice here when I go for constraint, it is not there anymore. Okay, clear till now? Any question? Till now, I didn't touch triggers. Just I'm explaining how this check constraint, which is one of the default constraints that we have in SQL, is executed. Now, what I want to do, I want to do the same thing using triggers. I want to use the same thing using what? A trigger. So let's see the syntax of our trigger, and here I need your full attention. The syntax for the trigger will be as the following. Create keyword, then the object type. Earlier when we say store procedure, we write here procedure, right? When we use table, we set table and so on. So always create, then the object type, and after that the object name. Now notice the first difference here between stored procedure and triggers is that in stored procedure we don't say on stuff. We just simply either add the parameters, then we say as, right? But here, no, I must define on which object I need to execute this trigger. Now, since we are dealing with DML triggers, either I can put here staff or what? A view. Either I can add staff, so that means, sorry, I can add table or what? A view. So I said here on staff, Then I will use the type, or I define the type of what? Of the trigger. It is after trigger or instead of. Here I'm saying what? It is instead of trigger. Okay. It will be activated on which action? On which action? It will be activated from what? From the action which is what? Update record. The action which is update. So later when I write or execute an update command, this trigger is supposed to be what? Supposed to be called. Okay, database management system will go to call that trigger. Now, notice here, I said for now I will just comment this one. Later I will visit it. Okay. I said here select all from inserted. Why? Because I want to show you that this data or these two tables inserted and deleted can be shown in what? While I'm executing the trigger or while the trigger is executed. Okay. Now, notice here what I have mentioned for my query. I said the following. I said if exists, okay, select salary from inserted where salary is greater than 30,000. Or maybe I will make it as 40,000 as for our example. No need, 30,000 will be okay. Because the maximum value is 30,000, right? Now, why here I used inserted, I didn't use staff? Let's go for this question first. Why I said select salary from inserted, not select salary from staff? Why? That means if I replace this with staff, it will work or it will give me an error. Because the data is inserted to the table already, right? Okay. Can you elaborate more? Can I say select all from staff? The answer is yes. But why I choose inserted, not to choose staff as a table? That means here if I want to say select all from staff, it will work. But why I choose it inserted, not staff? As a table, as a table. Because stored in the inserted table memory. The records from staff is copied to the insert table as a backup. Okay, now attention please. The inserted table will only include the last record. Attention please for this point. The inserted table will not include all the staff record, no. Only will include the latest inserted record. So let me just uncomment this one so we can see this one. So I will say select from inserted and also select from deleted because I'm doing what? I'm doing update, right? So let me just show the content of what? Of the two tables deleted. Clear? Inserted and deleted will only include what? The latest inserted or deleted records, not the whole copy from the table. The structure of the table will be copied, but not the data. So, where salary is greater than or equal to, let's say, 30,000, then what I will do here, I will do the following. I will say, print, salary must be less than 30,000, less or equal, must be less or equal, right? 30,000. Then what I will do here, I will do rollback. Why we do rollback? Because we want to ensure that if the update record was wrong, just simply go for the old record. Just go for the old record. So let's see how this works. Let's see how this works. So highlight, execute. Now first command completed successfully. Now when I go for my database here, Dream Home, when I go for the tables, which is staff, refresh. Then I go for the triggers. Notice here now we have a check cell trigger. And when I go for modification, modify, notice here it will give me what? The alter command. So sometimes if later I want to modify some of these queries, I can go here and I can do what? Modify the code, then I will save it. Then I will save it by execute the alter command, by execute the alter command. Okay, so let's now see how this works. Let's now see how this works. Now select all from staff just to see the data. Okay, now what I want to do here, I want to update staff, set salary equal to 100,000, where staff number is equal to SG5, which is what? Which is Susan. That means I want to update this salary to be what? To be 24, sorry, to be 100,000. So let's see what will happen when I execute my command. So highlight, execute. Now attention please. Notice here, first of all, I get the following messages. It says one row affected, one row affected. Why? Because basically the records were affected in either the table or what? On the memory level. And this is why usually we hide this one. We set this one as off, to show the message and so on. That depends. Okay. Now notice here what it says. First of all, it gives me this error message. It says this message. It says salary must be less or equal than 30,000. Okay. And then notice here it says give me this message. Then it says the transaction ended in the trigger. Notice here it used which term? Transaction. Because rollback is one of the main keywords related to what? To a transaction concept. Because any transaction will end in two case scenarios I have. Either commit, that means it was done successfully, or rollback means there was some error or mistake. That means I reached to failure state. I reached to failure state. Now let's go for the results. Notice here the first one I said in my trigger is what? Select all from inserted. So notice here we have what? We have the information from inserted. So the record in the inserted table was what? Was 100,000. Okay. Then the record in the deleted table was what? It was the old value, which is what? 24,000. 24,000. Clear? Any question till now? Any question till now? Okay, let me now modify the code here by using alter command. Okay, then also I want to do what? Select all from staff. I want to show you that the data was updated on the table before I do the rollback. Before I do the rollback. Okay, so alter, highlight, execute. Now the trigger was updated successfully by adding what? Select all from staff. Okay. Now I will go once again to execute the update statement. So I will go to execute. Now notice what happens here. The same thing. It gives me salary must be less or equal to 30,000. Then it says sorry, the transaction ended because there was a problem with what? With the data that I want to insert. Now when I go for the result, notice here this is the inserted table. This is the deleted table. And when I go here for staff table, notice the table was updated. That means the 100,000 value was there. But when I reach rollback, what happened here? It says remove the action that happens on my table because it is not meeting with what? With the condition that I have, which is the salary must be not exceeding 30,000. Clear? The inserted and deleted tables are tables which will be created when the trigger is activated. They will be having the structure of the table that I have the trigger on. What I mean by that? If I go later I'll go show you another example. When I go for a branch, for example, so that means if I go for select, if I have a trigger on the branch table, the deleted and inserted will have this structure. I will have a branch number, street, city, and postcode for both tables. Clear? So always, I can't say it is really predefined table, no. That table, inserted and deleted, will be generated referring to the table that you have. Okay, clear? Any question till now? Okay. Let me modify also the trigger now by commenting what? Rollback. Assume that I don't want to do rollback, and let me modify the trigger. Now, if I do update for my record here, what will happen to my table? I will get an error or something else will happen. Anyone, what will happen if now I execute the update statement once again? The data will be saved or I will get an error? We will get an error. Any other option or any other opinion? Now I said here what? I want to commit rollback. So when I highlight this code, alter, now there is no rollback. So if I done this update statement, what will happen? No error. So what will happen? Data will be inserted. That's correct. Data will be inserted. And this will be what? Logical error. Because if I forget rollback and data is violating your constraint or your condition, in this case you have a problem here, right? So let me show you what I mean by that. Highlight, execute. Notice here what happens. It says salary must be less or equal 30,000. I get the error, but there is no abort for the transaction, which means if I go for the results now, this is inserted, this is deleted, and now here we have what? We have the record updated, right? Earlier when I have the rollback, this record will go back to what? To the original value, which is 24,000. But now if I go outside my trigger and set select all from staff, notice here what happens? The data is inserted. So I have what? I have a logical error. And you need to be aware for that. You need to be what? Aware about that point. This is very important. This is very crucial when you're dealing with after trigger. Rollback must be there in explicit way. Because it's not there, end of the story. All your logic will have problems. Clear? Any question till now? Any question till now? Yes, I want to update it for the old value. So it is there. Clear before I proceed? Now, triggers can be enabled and it can be disabled. So for example, I can say now, I don't want this trigger to be activated when I do the update statement. So simply what I will do, I will say disable. And this is also one of the differences between triggers and the stored procedures, because stored procedures are not called, by actions. You must call it directly, all right? As a developer, you must call the stored procedure. But trigger will be called automatically. So therefore, what you can do, you can disable the trigger. You can disable the trigger. Okay, clear? Any question till now? Any question till now? Okay, let's go next. Let's go next here for, let me check one thing here. So we modify the trigger after update. Okay, can I say the following? Can I say after update insert? That means can I create one trigger to be activated in two actions or on two actions? Can I create a trigger to be activated on two actions or three actions like update, insert, and delete? Yes or no? The answer will be yes. You can have an after trigger or instead of trigger for update, insert, or delete. But we said what? If I have instead of trigger with the actions update, insert, and delete on a staff table, that will be the only instead of trigger that you can create. As I'll show you in the next example. But for now, any question about the trigger concept? Okay, the last thing just I want to highlight is the following. Can I say a check cell? So after insert will work with update command. Let me explain this with an example. But for now, can I say execute check cell, which is the trigger? That means can I call the trigger directly? The answer is what? The answer is no. That means if I try to do that, highlight F5, notice here the request for the procedure check cell failed because the check cell is a trigger object. Excuse me. So it clearly gives you the error message that this is a trigger, you can't call it directly. Okay? Now, can you say the following? Select all from inserted. If I execute this command, select all from inserted, what I will get? By the way, it seems there is some delay because I noticed that the message that I receive is, let's say, maybe 347, while the timing on my device was like 348. So there is some delay in the chat box. Okay. So when I say select all from inserted, what will happen if you execute this command? It will display the latest record. It will do nothing, right? It will do nothing. Why? Because inserted and deleted tables, they are only exist while I'm executing the trigger. That means the lifespan will begin from the beginning of the trigger execution to the end of the trigger execution. When the trigger ends, the two tables will be deleted. So therefore, if I go here and select F5, notice here it says invalid object name. We don't have something called inserted inside my database. That means I don't have a table here in my dream home called what? Inserted. Clear? So only inserted and deleted can be accessed while I am inside the trigger because they are special tables attached to the triggers only. Clear? Any question till now? Any question till now? Okay, let's go here to answer this question. So after insert, we'll work with update command. Now here, the trigger will be activated. Either you execute insert command or you execute update command. So if I write down right now an insert statement on staff table, and I set this one here, and I said what this one here will be responding to update or insert actions. So if I do update statement, this trigger will be called. If I execute insert statement, this trigger will be called. So in some cases, what I will go to do, I will go to say the after trigger will be after update, insert, and delete. Because I want to check what happens in my detail for all the actions. For all the actions. Okay? I hope this is clear. I hope this is clear. Later I think I have another example. We'll have like 2 actions and so on. I think that's all for today because we have like only 5 minutes remains. So just simply I will stop here, okay? And I will later proceed with the remaining of the codes, So any question before I take the attendance? Any question before I take the attendance? Okay, so far so good. So let me just take the attendance here. Okay, so that's all for today. Any question before I finish the lecture? So that's all, and see you next lecture, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.